G found the house today, returned and took pictures and other information. I've included all of the pictures he sent to give you a feel for the place in a link at the end of this page. Even though the sky was beautiful, I got shivers when I saw them. Following my post about last night's exploration of an abandoned house, I got a number of messages advising me to look into it more safely in a group to learn more about its past and observe its current condition. After that night, I messaged A to let her know about it and to express my want to learn more about the place in spite of my residual anxieties. "Hell no," she said. "I don't want anything to do with this. Don't go there." I messaged G about it after finding him on Facebook, essentially asking if he would like to return this weekend during the day to look around the house. He was ecstatic and stated he had been considering returning and was prepared to try to locate this location today without me because I was working and wasn't sure how I felt about returning. He promised to attempt to take pictures, so we guided him to the house using our combined recollections of the location of the park. He traveled an hour to the house's location this morning and contacted me to update me on everything that transpired on his way home. He began by saying that the park has completely changed, with a large playground, a picnic area, and a large number of people. Additionally, the park has grown significantly and now runs both behind and beside the house. He was surprised to discover that a couple currently lived in the house. A tennis court has been constructed behind the home, which was once the back garden, and the stone wall that surrounded the house has totally disappeared. Now, the only thing separating the house from the park is a wire fence. The actual house/garden is quite different. The actual garden is now tiny due to the tennis court, and it appears like the back rooms were removed and replaced with a tiny outdoor space. It appears from his photos that the outdoor space was tiled using checkerboard flooring. The home is still yellow, and it appears that some of the statues are still there. G managed to make his way to the front of the home and took one picture before a woman who was tending to the front garden noticed him. In order to save his own ass, G said hello and proceeded to tell Huara that he liked the house but believed it to be abandoned. He was able to get her to talk and learn the following details from her. She said that the house was only purchased 5 years ago by they. I take it that they refers to her and her partner. It was apparently constructed in the 1970s by a very wealthy foreign family who had intended to relocate here but never did, which shocked me because I had assumed it was older. After that, it was abandoned for roughly 10 years. It was empty until this couple saw it and fell in love with it because it was so unique, and they went on to renovate it after their realtor informed them that a family had lived there for a year in the late 1980s, but had moved out and tried to sell it for years without success. When G questioned the woman about the sculptures, she replied that they were from the original location, but that she only preserved a few because, in her opinion, many of them were creepy. She replied that they had discovered a lot of bizarre furniture in the house, which they had immediately disposed of when he asked whether they had saved anything else cool that was there when they bought it. G stated she appeared a little alarmed by the question. He then questioned her directly whether anything spooky or supernatural had happened in the house. She pretended to chuckle and say no, but she was very evasive and was obviously not giving him anything. Throughout this portion of their chat, she maintained her eyes on the front window. He claimed that he genuinely believed she was acting agitated and as though she was being observed. She seemed really upset and cold toward him when he asked if she had children. I don't know why he did this. Apparently he's not subtle, and she said it was none of his business, which is fair enough. When he asked if he could take pictures or look around, she said no, and she watched him leave for a long time, as if he had turned around and she was still watching him. She stared at him for almost 5 minutes before rushing back into the home as he ducked behind a tree and peered back. His hypothesis regarding the youngster's reaction is that perhaps they had a child who passed away. Additionally, he believes that the nursery we visited had something to do with this. He added that based on her behavior, he was very certain that something strange had happened in that house. He claimed that despite the fact that the house had been renovated and that there were people in the park, he still felt extremely uneasy being close to it. He claimed that this was especially true when he was taking pictures of the statues, which he claimed were identical to the night, but not twisted and wrong-looking, though he was unable to see the faces of some of them. He also claimed that there was something very strange about the woman and the house. He claimed that because he was so anxious about it and detested being there, he didn't even want to look at the pictures to email them to me. "Dude, I'm so scared I'm going to sleep with the light on tonight, and I've been on edge and jumpy since going there," he wrote in a recent message to me, adding that he regrets it. I still haven't discussed any of this with A. I feel so strange at the moment. On the one hand, I'm relieved that the house has been remodeled and is now occupied. It's comforting to know that those awful statues and paintings are more or less gone, but there's still a lot we don't know about it, and learning more about it and writing about it has made me desire answers. For example, who built this house, and why did they never live there? That you would invest a lot of money in developing this large home and then choose not to live there strikes me as really strange, as if something significant had to have occurred. The strangest thing is that a family moved out after a year. That seems rather odd to me, and it's obvious that something terrible happened because they had to leave, even if the house didn't sell for decades. For example, might it be related if they had children? The family leaving all of the extremely unsettling artwork and statues at the property would be strange. If it wasn't them, I suppose it was a squatter with severe mental health issues. If it was them, they must have been utterly strange and possibly dangerous individuals. Now it's even awful to think of the nursery. I sincerely hope that I wasn't raised by a complete maniac in that house, and that once the family left the crib, some random insane person painted the room black or decorated it horribly. That night, that room really did seem diabolical. In any case, these are the pictures that G took. If you don't know the narrative, these aren't that scary, but they gave me goosebumps and transported me back in time to that night. A few people recommended either going to the woman and telling her the truth about why G was there and what occurred 7 years ago, or going to a neighbor and asking them if they knew anything about the house, following my post about G visiting the house yesterday. Since the idea of going to the house makes me feel physically ill, I was far, far too afraid to go there and talk to the woman. I therefore made the decision to go alone today, my day off, and ask a neighbor if she knew anything about the house. I knocked on 4 houses across from the house, and only one old woman, A, answered. I asked her if she had time to talk about the house and everything she knew about its past, including the paranormal, as I was writing an article about it. She asked me in for coffee and said she might be able to help. J was eager to assist me and was knowledgeable. Her main points are as follows. She and her spouse, who died 2 years later, moved into her home in 1982. The house had always seemed so strange to her. When she first moved in, there was a shabby for sale sign in the yard. Before Carol and John Kenny, a young, affluent married couple in their late 20s, moved into the mansion from Brisbane in 1987 for John's job, she had no connection to the location. Carol was expecting a child. Jay claimed that after her husband passed away and their sons moved to Sydney, she felt incredibly alone and grew close to the young couple. She would frequently prepare dinners for them, invite them over, and offer pregnancy advice to Carol. Jay only visited the house a few times and reported that she thought it was gloomy and disagreeable, and that Carol would typically stop by for tea and cookies. After living there for a few months, Carol, who had no friends or relatives in Melbourne and no job, confided in Jay that she didn't like the house and that she wanted to return to Brisbane. Her spouse was never home, it was large and difficult to maintain, and she felt uncomfortable being there by herself. Even though her husband had painted over the awful painting she discovered in a cabinet, which we saw that night, she detested being in that room and was deeply troubled because she didn't know who had painted it. The statues that had been there when they moved in were another thing she detested. Carol detested them, so her husband had put them all into the garage and covered them with blankets. He intended to sell them and maintained that they had to be antique. It seemed that after telling Jay all of this, Carol grew aloof, stopped visiting as frequently, and occasionally didn't answer the door when Jay knocked. Because she frequently smelled of whiskey when Carol saw her, Jay began drinking during the day and suspected Carol. A few days prior to the birth of their child, Carol's husband paid Jay a visit. He appeared distressed. Carol was acting very strange and seemed depressed, as he put it. The baby no longer piqued her interest. He requested Jay to come over and assist Carol with setting up the nursery the following day. Carol was in a dreadful situation when Jay arrived with the crib her boys had used. She appeared disheveled and really agitated. She refused to tell Jay what was happening until Carol started crying, and Jay suggested that they go upstairs to decorate the nursery. "I don't want to go up there," she said. She eventually informed Jay that the painting had been exposed after the paint in the closet had been scraped off. Jay climbed up and witnessed this firsthand. According to Carol, John believed she was going insane and that she had done this on her own to get attention. Although Jay was appalled to witness Carol in such distress, she admitted that she had concerns about Carol's mental state at the time and worried about the child. Carol went into labor that night. Jay visited them at the hospital after John called to let her know. They didn't contact her again. A week later, she went to the house, but no one answered. She repeatedly called, but no one answered. She noticed a for sale sign in the front yard a few months later. She got in touch with the neighborhood real estate agent, who informed her that although he was unable to divulge private information, the house was for sale and vacant at the time. They had only been residing there for roughly 7 months. Jay never heard from them again, but approximately 6 months after they vanished, she discovered a spooky photo of a Greek statue in her mailbox. It appeared to have been taken from a book or magazine, and she kept it even though she didn't like it. Big. She also showed me a picture taken by her son while he was visiting her of the original stone wall prior to the park's expansion. Jay reported hearing noises and seeing individuals in the house's front window. She called the police multiple times to investigate squatters, but each time they told her property was vacant and just a bunch of statues. Jay expressed her uneasiness and regret not doing more to assist Carol, saying she thought the place was dangerous. About the new occupants, I questioned her. She claimed that a new, rich couple had moved in, but she had avoided them because, on the few occasions she had brought baked goodies to welcome them, they appeared aloof and indifferent. When I asked her if they had children, she replied that she had seen the woman running in the mornings with a pram when they first moved in, but that she had not seen the pram or any indication of a child in years. She allowed me to use these pictures for my tale. At Jay's request, I have blacked out the faces of the family. This was really distressing to me. Carol's experience sounds terrible. When I was in high school, my dad, stepmother, and stepsister resided in a really haunted house. The house was recently sold by my dad and stepmother. Since I hope I never have to return, I thought it would be safe to share some of my experiences there. Only a week or two after we moved here, this narrative was written. Our home was situated on a somewhat steep slope. There was space for a concrete patio and a small vegetable garden in the back. Beyond that, the terrain rose sharply into dense woods, teeming with oak, birch, and pine trees. Although the woods were very untamed, there was a clear trail that led directly into the thicket from our land. As soon as my stepsister saw it, Her curiosity was piqued. I was several years older than she. I would have been 14 or 15 when we moved in, and I believe she was around 12. My stepsister Rita was on me to accompany her in the woods as soon as we moved here. My stepmother thought I was an expert on nature because I used to go trekking with my dad before he started dating her. However, I was particularly turned off by how dense the underbrush was in the woods behind the house. I finally consented to investigate the woods behind the home after giving in to Rita's persistent nagging. We headed into the woods after I persuaded Rita to wear long pants to protect herself from brambles. The inclination was extremely steep, and it just grew worse as we descended. Thick and sticky, the brambles and plants along the forest floor pricked at our flesh through our jeans and clung to the legs of our pants. We were traveling along a small trail that wound from left to right in search of the simplest route through bushes and trees. We had a hard time following what was likely a deer and fox route. Rita once said, "This is very awesome. It's a real forest right behind our house," and attempting to keep from laughing in front of her. I already had the impression that I was too old to go play in the woods. Putting those ideas aside, I found it to be quite scary and unwelcoming. Even when I was her age, I would not have liked to play in such a setting. The woods were calm. The inclination simply continued to rise as we went higher and deeper. No insects or bird sounds were audible to us. The sound of our feet pushing through the underbrush and the wind blowing hot, sticky summer air on our backs seemed to be the only sounds. The ascent began to level out after a few minutes of exertion, and soon we were walking downhill as the woodland floor began to slope away into a valley. Have you ever been out in the woods like this before? Holding onto the back of my shirt, Rita inquired as she carefully made her way farther into the forest. She picked her way down, taking careful steps in my footsteps. "Not like this," I said, clinging to a crooked tree while extending my hand to assist her in climbing over a fallen log. We generally visited public parks. In order to prevent this kind of congestion, they keep their woodlands in good condition. "Isn't it exciting to have this as our backyard?" Grinning, she asked, pulling herself over the tree with a small but firm hand in mine. "Yeah, it is pretty nice," I said, despite my own opinion that the woods were too untamed to be enjoyable. We had only been climbing for 15 minutes or so, and the steep incline was already making my breathing more difficult. As we continued on, we could hear the sound of water flowing. Since we had entered the woods, it was the first sound we had heard, besides the wind. "A stream," said Rita. With excitement, she inquired, "Do you think it's at the bottom of the valley?" I grunted, "Yeah, probably," I said. "But don't hurry. You don't want to get wounded in here if you fall." Nevertheless, I remained available to assist her. I tried to maintain a touch on her as she rushed ahead of me, because I was anxious about the possibility that she had a broken leg or twisted ankle. The stream was a tiny, swift-moving, crystal-clear trickle near the valley's bottom. Tiny spherical stones and a fine silt coated the bottom. When we looked closely, we could see that small minnows were swimming around the margins where the current was slower. After removing our socks and shoes, we both rolled up our pant legs and entered the water. The current was rapid and reached our calves in the center. The water felt wonderful underfoot and was quite cool. Rita watched with excitement as the small fish swam about her feet and brushed against her toes, and she picked up stones to put in her pockets. I was glad Rita had proposed it, for the first time since we began to push through the trees. The effort to obtain this was worthwhile because it was a fantastic discovery. Then, as if suddenly, I started to get the intense sensation that I was being watched. Even that far into the woods, it was bright. The wind through the trees was damp, and the air was heated. Nevertheless, I felt a chill go down my spine, and my stomach and throat started to knot up. A part of my brain, like a primitive hind brain, suddenly awoke and said, Holy fuck, you are in danger. Glancing around as much as I could without turning my head, I noticed it as I froze, barely daring to breathe. What it was is still a mystery to me. Further down the creek, which gradually dipped between the hills it stood, it was observing us from the middle of the stream, standing erect and motionless. The brook was lined with small trees and shrubs that leaned toward the area above it to receive sunlight. Because of this, it was challenging to see the person or figure through them. Although branches and leaves covered their face, I could see a little portion of their torso, and everything about it gave me the uneasy feeling that something was seriously wrong. They stood upright, arms by their sides, legs straight, and knees locked in a human shape. They were moving the water because they could see it bubbling around their shins. However, they were entirely black. Not matte black, as if they were painted black or dressed in black, as though their shape had been blasted out of the air around them. There was an absolute lack of color and light. As Rita danced past me, I took hold of her arm, which was obviously too difficult for someone so much smaller than me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her turn to face me, her eyes narrowed as if she were about to confront me. Then she noticed it where I was looking. From the corner of her eye, I could see that she was going through the same experiences as mine. Her breathing became shallow as she froze, her eyes widening. Then I could feel her knees bow as her muscles strained. We resembled deer that had just sighted a predator, I realized. A portion of us understood that we were prey and that our fate would be determined by the next few seconds. I gave us both a single shove to get us moving. With an elegance and ruthlessness I didn't know she possessed, Rita fled up the hill into the trees. She jumped from rock to root to fallen tree without shoes, as if she had been doing it every day for years. I didn't feel quite as elegant as she did, because I was larger and thicker, but I thought that my worry and the adrenaline pounding in my ears made up for it. Every time I caught up, I pushed her with the hand at the seat of her butt or between her shoulder blades. There was the terrible silence behind us. No insects chirped, no birds sang, and not even the wind whistled through the trees as we were surrounded by a flurry of smashing sounds tearing through the forest. It was all a blur that rushed back through the trees. I never once turned around out of fear of what I may see, and Rita never turned around either. In constant concern that she would trip or fall, I kept my eyes fixed on her back and closely observed every step she took, but she never did. It seemed as though the sound was abruptly turned back on when we crashed back into our yard after crashing through the edge of the woods. Rita and I didn't give a damn. We kept running toward the house as quickly as our bodies would allow, and once we were inside, we slammed the back door and I slid the deadlock home. For a while, my breath heaved as I put my back against the door. Then I hurried to the front door and locked it too. After that, I checked every window on the first level to make sure the curtains were drawn and all of the windows were locked. It was only after that that Rita and I fell to the floor of the living room. "We left our shoes and socks by the creek," she said with a wheeze, pointing out her dirty feet for me to see. "Who fucking cares?" I whimpered in response. I went on. "I'll tell Dad I lost them." In actuality, that was just the beginning. Rita and I thought we had left whatever it was down in the creek after it happened. We never mentioned it to our parents because we knew they wouldn't believe us. We didn't abandon it, though. The following several years in that house were absolute torture since it followed us home. I have many more tales to share regarding what transpired. In the coming days, I'll focus on typing up the remainder.